I'm Dr. Christopher Barker, and welcome to Holding Space. We are going to examine a topic of some interest today that is sort of a combination of two things we've done in the past. We've talked about disorders existing on a spectrum, and this is not really so much a disorder as it is a condition, but also, we talked about emotionally immature parents, which is kind of a hot topic these days. A lot of people are realizing that they were either raised by or they know people who were raised by people who did not have a lot of emotional depth or ability to regulate their emotions. And so today we are going to take a look at emotionally immature partners because some of you may have some of those, or you may feel like you are one yourself. Let's take a look at that and see what that can seem to be in a relationship. We have to be careful with words. I mean, calling someone emotionally immature, yes, there are times that some people lack some characteristics of emotional maturity. There are times that people lack some ability to handle certain situations. Certain relationship conflicts can result in a sort of a pattern of behavior that seems almost borderline-ish or that seems almost narcissistic. And we have to sort of like be careful how we use those words because those are words that are reserved for disorders. And yes, people may have narcissistic behaviors, but that does not mean they are narcissistic. Words come with a packet of meaning attached to them. And if we just throw terms around, we may be accepting that packet as whole and complete and understanding. I've talked a lot about metaphors with people. And when we have a metaphor, is based on having a shared common knowledge. So when you say narcissistic, you may actually be conveying something about narcissism to another person who has also an understanding of narcissism, but they may not have your understanding of narcissism. Hopefully, I'm not saying narcissism too many times. And so by using that term, and even by using it with the therapist may say, oh, yeah, well, I know what that is. But it may not, in fact, be what's going on. I was having a dialogue recently with a colleague about the meaning of words, and some of those words that we use can convey too much meaning or not enough. It's important to say, well, why do you think that? And what sorts of things are they doing that indicates that to you? Why are you choosing that word? It's really important that we look at the whole perspective. So back to the original topic, which is emotionally immature partners. What can you see in a partner who's emotionally immature? Well, lack of empathy is the number one thing that is usually mentioned. And it doesn't come from an inability to empathize that you will see with some psychological disorders. It comes with an inability to have had a great deal of depth of emotional development. So they may not understand completely what you're going through, and they can be dismissive of that or they can just not connect, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they don't have the capacity for empathy. It generally just means that somehow it hasn't really developed. They may have a disrespect for boundaries. They may ask too much of you. There may be times that they are intrusive. There may be times that they are too bold, pushing your boundaries and not respecting it. There's an inability to go deep. They may not have a fully developed sense of emotions. We talked about emotional vocabulary when we were talking about emotionally immature parents, and some people have not developed a full vocabulary for all their emotions. They may not be able to identify them. They may not be able to even feel them the same way that people who are more in touch with their feelings, who are more developed emotionally, can do. They may struggle with conflict. They may have difficulty controlling their emotions because they are out of practice of being subtle, of being empathic, of being aware. They can just respond to frustration with extreme frustration themselves. They can respond to demands with further demands. They can, in short, be aggressive sometimes with their feelings. They can also be detached. There are times that they will seem to not know what you're talking about, to be genuinely puzzled as to what's going on or why you're feeling what you're feeling in response to something that's going on. They work more on the surface of things. They have difficulty compromising because, again, compromise requires a certain amount of empathy. It requires a certain amount of understanding of what you're going through. and an awareness of what is halfway in between. And sometimes that just hasn't been developed very well. And they may play down meaningful conversations. They may seem to take your serious concerns very lightheartedly or not seriously at all, or just dismiss them. Well, that's ridiculous. Why are you feeling that way? They may use words like, why are you feeling that way? Or don't feel that way, because they don't understand why you feel that way. They get defensive easily. So if you confront them on something, if you say that something's really bothering you, they may like get their backs up and say, well, I didn't do that, or that's your fault. And again, those are gaslighting techniques of narcissists, but that does not mean they're narcissistic. It's a totally it's related, but it's different. Playing down meaningful conversations, getting defensive easily, not communicating their love. That is one. I frequently ask people to take the love languages test, and because sometimes we have very different ways of communicating love, but they may have a great deal of affection, but just not genuinely know how to show it. Not an excuse, that's a fact. They may not have had any practice in love the way you know it. So again, that's why emotional immaturity can be aided by knowing love languages. It's really important for me to receive words of affirmation. And they may say, okay, well, now I know how to handle that. Sometimes you have to have the willingness to instruct, to provide a corrective emotional experience. And it doesn't mean that you're doing all the work. It means that you're helping out somebody who may have difficulty. They can bear grudges. They can make decisions alone without consulting you because, well, it just doesn't occur to them. They may shift the blame easily. They may say, well, that's not my fault. That's your fault. And because they don't really understand that it's their fault, or it's not even fault at all. It's just something that you need to work on together. And I know I'm cramming a lot of information in here, but again, I often tell people, please comment, ask questions, like and subscribe to this podcast. And if you have any further questions beyond comments, you can always email. But I do try to answer as many comments as I can. And so, if there's something that you're curious about or something that gets left out, please feel free to ask. Who might be emotionally immature? Well, if you grew up with caregivers who were emotionally immature themselves or who have not really given you that emotional vocabulary that we spoke of, they can, in essence, sort of create a copy of themselves, which is somebody who just doesn't have that awareness. We learn what we live. There's that old saying, children learn what they live. And if we are around people who are doing these same types of things, being detached, having difficulty compromising, not listening or listening inaccurately or shutting you down when you're emotional, that's kind of what you're going to come up with also. Neglect or trauma can also create emotionally immature people. Childhood emotional neglect or abuse can stunt emotional growth and development. It can lead to defensiveness, avoidance, difficulty with vulnerability. Vulnerability is really hard for people who have been abused because if you open that door too far, somebody might come in and hurt you. And there might not even be an awareness of that. But indeed, it might be one of the reasons why people shut down easily. Poor role models, even beyond parents, people in your life who have come out and been your emotional role models, coaches, teachers, people who have a limited relationship with you are going to have a limited ability to model the appropriate behaviors and feelings. What can you do? Well, I mean, if you're dealing with someone who has low self-esteem, difficulty recognizing and naming emotions, they can have outbursts or shutdowns. Again, fear of intimacy. They often have discomfort with deep conversations or emotional experiences. Couples therapy is always a good idea. And again, just because I'm a therapist doesn't mean that I'm always trying to send people to therapy. It's just sometimes you need a neutral party. I mean, you can't have a football game without a referee. You can't have a baseball game without an umpire. You need somebody to call the balls and strikes sometimes. And a therapist can help with that, as well as help with finding a common ground and interpreting and saying, I hear your wife saying, or I hear your boyfriend saying this. Is that what you're experiencing? And, sometimes just somebody being able to provide a neutral language that's somewhere in between what your experiences are can be really helpful. People who have been traumatized or have had difficult relationships in the past can become easily triggered. And we've talked about triggering in past podcasts also. And people don't always get over their triggers right away, even if they realize they're being triggered. That feeling, that sense of perspective persists, sometimes for days. And as long as you're aware of what you're dealing with and you don't take it too personally or you don't become defensive yourself or back off, then that might be something that you can help the other person through. But again, cooperative arrangement. It requires communication. It requires validation. Emotional growth is possible. You have to be able to consider the idea that you can reflect and change, and you need someone willing to help you with that. Some people can regulate by themselves, and some people need someone else there to co-regulate with them. If you have someone who's emotionally immature and who's willing to work on this, then I'd say you're off to a good start. There will be more about this topic and probably similar other ones. Again, this is another example of a spectrum. There's some people who are sometimes emotionally immature, other times not. There's some people who are very emotionally immature and others who are not. But send us those questions and comments, like and subscribe, and keep talking to me. And I'll keep holding space for you. Thank you.